Well, hi, friends. I'm here with Sister Heather, our vocation discernment coordinator, for us to talk about our commitment for this month of March, the consecration of love in marriage and celibacy. And so, Sister Heather, a lot of our novices probably know you in addition to being our vocational discernment coordinator, from you kind of dropping in on some of the postulancy cohorts to talk about this commitment in particular. And I know it's one that you're really passionate about. So what is it about this commitment to the consecration of love in marriage and celibacy that draws you so much vocationally?
I believe making vocational celibacy visible and compelling in the church is a key part of my vocation in the order. I have a passion for pushing against this idolatry of romance in our culture and in the church. This idea that one primary relationship that is romantic in nature is not just normative, but necessary for flourishing.
So in looking at this commitment from our rule of life this month, here's what our rule of life says toward the beginning of the section. It says, celibacy and marriage are both vocations to love in specific ways, and both must be carefully considered and discerned. And so I think a lot of us have maybe heard about celibacy as a vocation. Probably it's not something that a lot of us know. Like, how do we even discern that? And probably we haven't, a lot of us, heard about marriage talked about as a vocation that needs discernment. So what does it mean for these to be vocations? What does that look like for us to discern these?
I think it would be helpful if first we unpack what we mean by vocation, because I think that when most people hear the word vocation, they think career, what we're paid to do. And in the order, when we talk about vocation, we think of it more broadly than that, as centered around three questions: who God is creating you to be, what God is calling you to do, and what is the way of life that would best nurture and support you as you lean into yeses to those two previous questions. So whether we're single or married, or in a religious order for that matter, we choose to orient our lives in very specific ways that give us opportunities for formation that shapes our loves in particular directions that will, if rightly discerned, nurture and support us as we are becoming who God is creating us to be and doing what God is calling us to do.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think I remember you expressing this sometimes as this three-part vocation, as being, becoming, and doing. Yes. Right? So it sounds like that's that becoming part. What is going to help us to become who we are, who God is making us to be? And one of those paths can be marriage. One of those paths can be celibacy. And so what does that discernment then look like, to be able to kind of figure out what is the path that is going to support me in this becoming who God is creating me to be doing the things that God is creating me to do?
Yeah. I think most people just assume that they'll get married and no discernment really takes place.
Yeah.
And only a select few are destined for a vocation of lifelong celibacy. But I think that, well, first of all, singleness is something everyone will experience. And a lot of people seem to think that their time of singleness should be oriented towards ending their singleness. There's actually a lot of really good, deep formational work to be done in singleness. And so I think it's really valuable for people to authentically engage the question of whether God might have a vocation to celibacy or marriage. They're two equal and good vocations to consider.
And something we've talked about actually just recently is kind of what that process ended up looking like for each of us, and really similar in ways. And we each arrived at different conclusions. You making commitment to celibacy, and I obviously just in the past couple of years, I got married. And so what were the things that you noticed in your discernment process that allowed celibacy to become something that was highlighted for you as this is part of how God is going to make me the Sister Heather that God is creating me to be?
Yeah, I think I noticed really early on that there was a difference in the way you and I both talked about celibacy.
Yeah.
It seemed clear that God was giving me a grace to see how celibacy and orienting my life in that way would make me freer and more open and able to love more widely. When I talked about it, I was full of joy and excitement. I did not notice that in you as you talked about it until you started leaning towards a vocation to marriage. And as you were falling in love with Anna, your now wife, I saw you become a freer, more generous, open version of yourself. And as I've gotten to know Anna, it is clear to me how she is God's gift to you in specific areas of formation that you were desiring and areas where you wanted greater freedom and generosity. I could see how God is using her in your life to create the kinds of opportunities for that formational work.
Yeah, I've loved how you've put a point on this sometimes to talk about what opens us to the love of God and what opens us to greater receptivity to the love of God. And that, it sounds like, was something that you were able to find in your pursuit of just even the pursuit of discernment of celibacy. And the clear thing that I was confronted with in my discernment was there's a closedness that was happening to me as I was beginning to kind of resign myself to this. But as I was opening my heart toward the possibility of committing to somebody else, that was actually the thing that was opening my heart. So like I was kind of leaning toward the same thing that you were leaning toward. When you were leaning toward it, you were experiencing this opening. And when I was leaning toward it, I was experiencing this closing. And that I think we put our finger on, like, man, that's a pretty clear mark of discernment.
Yeah, and actually, this past year, because it's my 5th year of my 5-year vow of celibacy, I started discerning whether or not to renew this vow. And I noticed that even as I started considering the possibility of marriage, it felt like my life was starting to narrow. And since we had already discovered that as a key discernment marker for this vocation, that just felt like it reinforced my original decision to be celibate, and I plan to renew my vows.
And of course, in all of this, like there is a narrowing that happens when we choose and when we consent to this constraint, and in that particular narrowing, not that narrowing of like the way that I was kind of closing myself off, but that narrowing into this is the path for me. That just kind of becomes in clearer focus as we see what is it that's going to do that work of formation to become who God is creating us to become. So hopefully a lot of that can be helpful for people who are kind of actively in that discernment. I think a lot of us who are in a committed state of life know people who might have that discernment in front of them, but I also know a lot of people in the order have already begun to commit themselves to a life of celibacy, or they're already committed in a vocation of marriage. So what does the work of discernment within those vocations look like then, once you've already kind of embarked on that commitment?
Yeah, well, John Mark Falkenhayn, who has written this fantastic book called How We Love, which is a guide to formation for the celibate life and has informed my thinking a lot on this subject, says that it's important to discern our initial motivations for the decision that we made. And I think that's incredibly valuable, particularly as we look at this commitment from the lens of consolation and desolation, because if you come into marriage, or celibacy for that matter, with expectations or motivations that are not rightly ordered, that can lead to desolation and disappointment that is really not helpful to our formational work. And we can pay attention to those movements and realize, hey, something is not quite right here. I had an expectation, a motivation, something I thought this state in life would do for me that it is not doing, and I need to talk to God about that.
That's great. And what would you say that, as we might experience some of this desolation that can manifest itself with maybe some disordered or false motivations, expectations coming into it, what do we do with consolation? that we find as we're leaning into these states of life?
I think there are a lot of really good, rightly ordered motivations for marriage or celibacy. And as we cultivate those in our lives, leaning into those things which do bring us consolation will give us the joy, the meaning, and the purpose that sustain our vocations even when it gets really challenging.
I know that this is work that you're leaning into particularly right now in the work that you're doing with the order and beyond the order. And would love for you to just share a little bit about how you're leaning into this vocationally right now. What are the things that you're working on around the discernment of marriage and celibacy?
We're creating a program called Discernment and Formation for Celibacy and Marriage, where we hope to take people through a process of developing self-awareness, self-knowledge, and self-acceptance so that they can give themselves as a self-gift, either to God in consecrated celibacy or to a marriage partner in marriage. And we hope to have a pilot program up and running within the next month or two, with the full program launching in the fall. And the goal is to create a gift for the church so that churches can run this program with their communities and help people discern the right vocation for them. One of the things I learned from the two of us discerning this kind of in tandem with each other is that celibacy and marriage are, designed to nurture and support one another. They're not in opposition to one another. I think too often the church wants to separate these two groups of people because their needs seem so vastly different. But we all need the same kinds of relational formation to develop, broad, rich support networks of spiritual friendships, formational healing for our woundedness, the ability to emotionally regulate ourselves. So many of the formational things that I have found helpful as a celibate individual would also be really helpful for somebody who's married. And so we are designing this program to be a way that people can begin to engage that formational work alongside discernment. They don't have to make a decision before they start pursuing formation. I think one of the things that came up in a conversation we had previously was that you felt like you were making deposits in two separate bank accounts as you were discerning celibacy or marriage. And I just don't think it needs to be that way. I think we can go through a process of formation that leads to discernment and can help us try on celibacy. You can't really try on marriage, but you can definitely try on celibacy. And so I hope that this is a gift to the church, that people will be able to authentically discern the right vocation for them in an environment where they are in community with other people and finding ways to have conversations around these subjects that maybe they wouldn't have in other places.
I know that we've mentioned in the chapter meeting, maybe one or two other spaces, we've kind of gotten to put this in front of people, but you've also been carrying a potential partnership for us right now with the order to continue to be in conversation with people who have this discernment in front of them. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah. It seems like the community of people that are most authentically and seriously discerning a vocation to celibacy right now are individuals who experience primarily sexual attraction to their same gender. And so Revoice is a wonderful organization of Christians who experience same-sex attraction but are committing to live lives according to the traditional sexual ethic. And so I have been in conversation with members of that organization in developing this program because we really want to make sure that we are supporting this community of people who do not have a way of authentically discerning their vocation to celibacy in any other venue.
Thank you, Sister Heather, really from me for the work that you've been doing, which I know, again, is a personal vocational call that you have, and it's really shown up the way that it's a gift for the order of the common life, for people in the order of the common life. And I also just think it models really wonderfully what it looks like, when some of these commitments that all of us are leaning into, but when one of these commitments like really grabs us, and like this, I have vocational work in this, and you've been running with it, and it's really showing how much of a gift it is to people, the work that you've done in this. So thank you for this conversation. I always enjoy our conversations, especially around this. And so friends, hopefully you're hearing in this that whether this is something that has some vocational discernment work ahead of you, or whether just as you are in one of these vocations, temporarily in celibacy, in marriage, or committed to celibacy, that there is discernment work that is open to you, paying attention to those movements of consolation and desolation, to really participate in the formative work that the love of God is inviting you to. So as always, we have questions below that we want you to just be leaning into this month, to be holding, to be taking into your formation groups, into your conversations with God. And we look forward to continuing this conversation with you. So thank you, friends. Be loved.